Welcome to Creative Leadership. I'm your host, Jeremy Sirota. Quincy Jones once said, you have to know the rules before you can break them. But here's the thing. My guest today, Terry McBride, didn't know the rules when he started Nettwerk Music Group in his one-bedroom apartment in 1984. And yet, 40 years later, he continues to find success over and over again. I'm excited to chat with anyone who says fear is simply a four-letter word for opportunity. Terry, welcome to Creative Leadership.
I had forgotten I actually said that. Thank you.
I did some deep research on you. There's a fair amount of speeches and writings you've done, so there's a lot to learn. So let's dive right in. You were a civil engineering student who, when he started Nettwerk, had never signed an artist. You never worked at a label. When everyone told you radio wouldn't play two female artists back to back, you created the Lilith Fair Festival. You helped co-found that. When the industry was suing fans for file sharing, you were paying their legal bills. When downloads were king back in 2008, you wrote a paper predicting streaming would dominate. And in many ways, I look at that and I say, it seems like not knowing the rules has been your greatest advantage. But I'm curious how you would describe it.
I definitely think in the early days, not being in the industry allowed Mark and I to do it through our own lens, through our own perception. And back then, the music business was very oblique. It was very gray. No one paid attention to data. As a civil engineer, data told you whether things were going to stay up or whether they're going to fall down. So data was essential. And yet there was no data. I think the first data with inside the music business was when the barcode came. And when, Billboard and, SoundScan finally put that into the chart, an unknown artist named Garth Brooks went right to #1. Now we're working with reality versus this, this sort of fudged system that you basically built. So not being beholden to what was there allowed us to come at it differently. And in, the early days, we used to say an attitude, not a problem. And that was kind of our saying, because we weren't being assholes. We're nice. We're really nice Canadians, but we didn't feel beholden to what the system was, which was you had gatekeepers every step of the way. Being in Vancouver, which is not a musical center to anything, just a very beautiful city to live in, it kind of allowed us to do our own thing. And, it also, in a roundabout way, due to proximity, forced us to go south. So rather than going to Toronto, which is, a 4-day or 5-day drive, which back then that's all we could afford, we could be in LA in 2 days. We went south, and there's more people in, Washington, Oregon, and California than what there are in, Canada. So that became our initial market.
Was that intentional on your parts, or was it really just, there's always an element of luck to success, and that's always kind of glossed over a little bit. Do you think how much did luck play a factor versus intentionality when you were making these decisions early on?
Well, I think the luck that Mark and I were in Vancouver forced us to go south, which was the practicality. You kind of deal with a very pragmatic way of going about it. If I'd been in Toronto, would I have gone west? No, I would have gone south. There's more people in the northeast of America than what there are in Ontario. So, I don't think that would have changed. Over time, we found that to have success in Canada, you need to have success elsewhere first, because the Canadian market was very dominated by the major labels, and there was really no way into radio because it was locked.
I want to focus on something else that seems like you've pioneered, which is this idea of communities, as you call them, instead of fan clubs, which is a very different approach to artist development. Not that others haven't focused on sort of staying in the same genre and finding similarities, but this seems different. I had a couple questions, which is, one, could you just explain what it means? Second is, how did you come about it?
Musical artists have overlapping fan bases. Obviously, singer-songwriters, those might be tighter versus a singer-songwriter versus maybe a rock act or an urban act. So it's understanding that if someone likes this artist, there's a pretty good chance they'll like that artist. That's just intuitive. And it's intuitive to me as a music listener. So to bring that thought process into data wasn't really that hard. We just needed to find these sort of data to basically tell us whether this was actually correct. And if you look at it, European festivals where you've got artists coming from all over the world, it's a community. And it's not defined by borders, not defined by even by continents. It's defined by a love of those artists. And you discover new artists at those festivals. So it was just that thought concept was like, okay, in a flat world digital system where there are no more barriers to finding out about artists, those overlapping fan bases can be niche. But if they're niche, and it's kind of a bit of the network's thought or the Netflix thought originally, a niche audience on a worldwide basis is actually quite big. We really focused on that. And I think we did it intuitively in our early days. And when streaming came along, definitely did it with intention. And we actually started drawing our own maps and at some point hired a real smart, coder. And they basically went to the direct APIs and we could see it in real time. If you love an artist that's small in that community, you can work them up to be closer to the artists that are big. Mm. And what happens then is naturally these bands start taking each other out on tour, which is no different than, let's say, the Warped Tour in like the late 90s. It's just the same thing. It's just a community.
How have you evolved this concept? Is it more intuition now versus data? And then my favorite question, if you were going to start it all over from scratch, from day one, how you approach this, would you do anything differently?
One, would I do anything differently? No. And if you look at every successful label, it was usually based on a community, even if it wasn't the intent. And this is from Atlantic to Reprise to Warner's to whoever it is. In the 60s and 70s, all of those labels were actually communities. That thought got lost when they became part of these multinational, conglomerates. So would I do it any differently? No. Mark and I love, multiple types of music, but, we really love folk music, that their music's emotive. It's not just a vibe. It's emotive. We love, classical, piano. We love jazz. We love all these things. But for us to add value to an artist's career, we have to be honest with ourselves. And if we've already built that actual community, there's very direct ways that we can add value to it. So yes, that's exactly what I would do today. Initially, Nettwerk 1984, that wasn't the case. We had a electro pop band, an electro grunge band, and Skinny Puppy. We had a folk band. As over time, we've realized that it's better to focus on one and build it, then focus on the next and build it. Inside the communities, we can see the smaller artists that are basically bubbling.
When I think about sort of, people have been very successful. There's a lot of different types of people who've run labels and their successes come in different ways. And, typically you don't think of you had a great passion for music early on, but you were also a civil engineer. And so I'm kind of curious how you weave those two sort of mindsets together, which is this ability to approach process and data and see around the corners, and then the ability to connect with artists, which you've done from the earliest time, and understand that creative process and their needs. Do you see those as complementary? Do you see are you inhabiting two different worlds? Or do you see those as the same?
I actually see it as the same world. I mean, the two businesses that I've been in are music and yoga, both thousands of years old. Both, the economic engine is the monetization of the emotional connection. So music is, and when you go and love a song, you put your own emotion into that song. It becomes a bookmark with inside your life. 20, 30, 40 years later, you hear that song, you know exactly what you were thinking and where you were when that song became part of your life. The business part of that is monetizing that actual emotional connection. People love to share music. Whether in my days, it was the, mixed cassette which then led to the mixed CD, which then led to playlists. So these are people sharing an expression of what they love. And that is the power of music. That's where you monetize too. The data behind that and understanding people's behaviors, that's the beauty of data inside engineering, is you try things over and over and over again, and you fail. At a certain point, everything lines up and you understand it really, really well. And that's a huge value. Taking a bias out of data is probably the hardest thing. So a lot of our thought process starts with intuition, and then we see the data supports it. And 99 out of 100 times it does. And the 1% that it doesn't is really interesting, because why? And, why is such a powerful word with inside any business. Why? So, a lot of our thought process over like the last 40 years has really been governed by that. We have the opportunity to change people's lives in a very positive way, maybe even to the point of them, not doing something stupid like committing suicide, or helping them through a really difficult part with a family illness or a breakup or any of that stuff. That's the power of music, everything that we've ever done. And combining that with data allows us an unbiased and unegotistical view of what's actually.
That's really interesting. That actually brings up something you had said. I was listening to your TED Talk, and you spoke about learning lessons instead of mistakes. You also spoke about the importance of seeing challenging times in a positive light. I find that I've now seen that as a common trait in most leaders. I've heard this multiple times in a row from leaders, is always trying to focus on the positive. I'm just curious whether you see that as essential for leadership, as you see that as just that's part of your personality to view things in that light. I'm curious where that resonates for you.
I think it's a learned character. I always say the journey is walking backwards. You already know what it looks like. I mean, Mark and I imagined what Nettwerk was. The journey has always been walking backwards. And it's been a windy road. You trip and you fall. You don't learn unless you make mistakes. Because if you always, quote, do it right, you're not learning anything. It's rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. You're not learning anything. And in a world where technology and culture moves fast, what worked a decade ago will not work today. You need to make mistakes. I see huge value in mistakes. And, I really emphasize that to my team. What is the learning? And it's not what went wrong. It's what didn't go right. So you need to flip it. You need to look at it differently. What's the opportunity in what happened? It's just a way of looking at it. And there's 2 meetings inside my company that I put a lot of passion into, and that's the A&R team, and that's the analytics team. And those are the 2 places where I spend a lot of my time thinking, pondering things, trying to understand what's happening, trying to test out my intuition.
That makes a ton of sense to me. I'm going to give this speech today, and one of the things I'm going to talk about is there was a record executive who used to have what they called their weekly 911 emergency meeting. You can imagine what people showed up with, right? They either had emergencies, faked emergencies, or turned things that weren't emergencies into that. I was trying to imagine what if they called it their weekly strategic priority meeting, how differently people would show up. To me, what you were just saying about learned behaviors, there's a lot of things that people can learn that they may not realize at first, like staying positive, not panicking. It's a learned behavior. And in fact, especially with leadership, when leadership pushes down that sort of mindset and attributes, it can really help to permeate an organization.
It just comes down to a simple why. Why? It's powerful.
Yes, it is. You also said something that triggered another memory that you had said as well, and it was a while ago, about how Nettwerk has evolved. You need to keep evolving. And 15 years ago, you said everything we've done at Nettwerk is based on common sense diversification. And you were talking about movements into merchandising and publishing and artist management, but you said it wasn't based on a grand vision. It was just based on controlling your destiny. I'm curious, does that still resonate? Do you still approach it the same way? How do you think about that now?
We made a conscious decision. When I wrote the paper, Meet the Millennials for Westminster University in Oxford in 2008, I was essentially over that 3 to 4 month period of writing that paper, writing the sort of future blueprint of Nettwerk. And it's also at that point that I decided inside my own personal life that I wanted to tone things down. I was very much on my yoga path too. And I very much wanted a much more simpler life. So I went, we're in all these things. Which ones are we really good at? And which ones do not bring so much stress into people's lives? So we made a conscious decision to be a record label, to focus on the music, decided to step out of artist management and focus on adding value to an artist's career with all of the learnings of the previous, at that point, 30 plus years. So that kind of became our focus, and we decided to simplify the business. As we bought and cleaned up a bunch of publishing rights, cleaned them up, sold them to Cobalt, took those monies, went only into sound recordings, only into the record side of the business, have become specialists in just that. So when we work with an artist, we're like, we're not in your merchandising business. We're not in your live business. We're not in your publishing. We will help you sell live tickets. We will add value to your publishing, but this is what we're really, really good at. So it was an understanding that we were, getting older. And, me personally, I did not want to be on the road 7 months of the year, and I was, focused on possibly starting a new relationship, new family. And I wanted that to be my priority. So being simple is hard. And I constantly deal with my executive team wanting to complicate things. And I'm like, why do you want to do that just to get that when you can just do that? It's also on the yoga side of my business. If the person at the desk can solve 99% of the problems of that guest, that's a great interaction. So simple's hard, but that's how we evolved. Initially a management company, you needed to be in the merchandise, you needed to be in the live, you needed to be in all of these things in order to add value. That you can be just a record.
As you think back over the 40 years and you look at how the industry has evolved, you look at how your approach has evolved, what is the biggest lesson you've taken from all of this? I mean, I love that idea of, we already knew what it was going to be and we were just walking backwards in it. But there's still lessons you learn along the way. This is the give advice to your grandkids, the give advice to yourself as a 21-year-old. What is that advice you give back into them?
I wouldn't change a single thing that we actually did. Mark and I started off as a record label. We only went into management because the artists that we had signed wouldn't leave the city of Vancouver. So back in those days, to promote, you had to play live because we couldn't get on the radio. We weren't the type of music that fit on the radio. So live was the only way to expand our audience. So I turned into a booking agent. I turned into a manager, did all of those things. But in doing all of those things and bringing the executive team along, who's grown with us, we've learned, we understand all of those things. I understand how an artist feels. I understand how a merchandise company works. I understand the whole live eco structure. And just being a record label now, but having all those understandings is huge. It means we can talk to a manager and we can strategically add value. We've had artists say, if I think of someone like, Wild Rivers, like 3-4 years ago, they're like, we want to be able to go into 1,500 to 2,000 seaters with Inside Europe. At that point, they were in under 1,000 seaters in the Northeast of America, not even playing big venues within inside Canada. So our goal through the community model was to build them into that, which shows how a record label can add value to an artist's career, not just on the intellectual property side of things.
People have been decrying the death of the label for 20, 30 years now. And what I've learned is, number one, the label is in fact more important than it's ever been. And that everyone who says they're going to do it differently, what it ends up looking like at the end of the day is it just starts to look like a record label again. They've just cobbled it together in different ways. Let's talk about growth. Scaling is tough. And as you scale, especially an artist roster where artists want your attention, they want your time. How do you scale Nettwerk as your roster gets bigger? Because sure, you can add infrastructure, you can add more staff or more offices, but you also want to maintain that special thing that makes Nettwerk what it is. How have you worked through that as you've grown?
I think you iterate as you go. So you grow, you shrink a bit. You grow, you shrink a bit. And there always has to be a level of honesty. If an artist has been on your label for 3-4 years and you've gotten them to a certain level, but you can't punch them through, then you need to have an honest conversation going, we're not the right place for you to be now. Even if you're successful, we're not the right place. And it's understanding that and being happy with being part of that process, but not the whole process, not owning it all. And so we grow, we shrink, we grow, we shrink, and learn along the way. Right? I mean, I've learned now that if you sign a young artist that is really just starting off and has a bit of a buzz, putting a whole department of, from the A&R to the digital, to the press, to the marketing, to all these things behind that, it's an utter waste of time. What you need initially is 1 or 2 people who understand that artist, understand that community, and can optimize the artist for it. Otherwise, you overwhelm the artist. It actually hurts the process. It doesn't help. So understanding that artist path is really crucial. Building a company that can adapt to that versus just a Lego approach is really, really crucial. So we're always, about every 2 or 3 years, we kind of reiterate. And we reiterate on what we've learned, on what works and what doesn't.
Yeah. I'm actually curious. A lot of people I hear from say, great, get it. That makes a lot of sense. What's the actual practical way you do that? Is there do you have a recurring meeting where you sit and evaluate? You have certain basic questions you ask yourselves. You gather as a leadership team once a year. What is that? How does that actually express itself?
I think it's a constant conversation. People that wait for a quarterly or annual meeting, you're not dealing with things in real time, and elephants that are small become big. It's, I'd rather get the elephant when it's small and get it out of the room. One of Rick Artboyd, who's one of my partners, he had a great habit every week pointing out the sort of new elephant that's wandering in. And it was of great value because him and I could talk about it, and then we would come up with a plan on how to try and deal with it, right? It doesn't mean that we were always successful, but that honesty is key, right? And it's honesty with the artist manager, and within your own team. And honesty is hard because, people don't like to admit that it's not working.
Yeah. I love the idea. I think I need to develop a role called the elephant spotter. It's a great term. Someone always said to me, you want to have someone, no matter how big, no matter how successful you get, who strategically challenges you. But I also like that idea of the person who's identifying issues before they get too big. And they're saying, hey, I see where this is going. Let's address this now.
Those challenges, your things come from your younger staff who get to come into what you're doing, see it for what it is, and say, hey, I'd do it this way.
Yeah. Yeah. To me, that I completely agree with you. And one of the values at the leadership top or from leadership down is making sure that your actions match your words. Because everyone says that, right? We want you to be proactive. We want you to have ideas and we're open to everything. And then when the reality hits and they get shut down or they get ignored, they've learned a lesson, which is don't make recommendations. And so you really have to live by that. And that's tough, especially in a world in which everyone is so busy and we're so challenged with time to make space for those ideas.
We do a roster review every 2 weeks. And on alternate weeks, Tom Gates runs something called the ANR Fiesta, which is nothing but ideas, complaints, issues, strategy. That allows that conversation to happen.
I like that a lot. It's all about either asking questions or making space. One of the ways I try to do it is when we have our exec calls, instead of just going through a punch list, trying to start with big questions. Because when you have big questions, it takes a little bit to get people going. But once they do, suddenly it starts to open the floodgates of all the things they're not talking about, but you should be.
Yeah, no, that's a great way of going about it.
I want to switch gears a little bit here because it's something I'm very curious about. It's advice you've given, which is to entrepreneurs to follow their intuition and not let logic get in the way. But at the same time, you've also talked about how much data informs how you've approached things. And so for those entrepreneurs, those who want to start, whether it's a record label or some type of business, maybe help me reconcile the advice you're giving then, how your career has tracked, and whether you would update that advice.
I have no desire to update that advice at all. Logic is a bias placed upon data. It's a process and it's the human desire to complicate. Every layer of bureaucracy that you put in takes you away from intuition. Intuition is always annoyingly right. So what you're looking for in the data is does it support your intuition at this point? It might not. It might take 2 years for it to actually support it. That doesn't mean that you've lost that sort of thought. So logic is something must go from A to B. Intuition is something can go from A to Z. But logic says you got to go A, B, C, D, and you got to do the full 26 steps. And I'm like, yeah, but maybe you don't need to do all 26 steps. Maybe only do 3. So it's not that I throw logic out. I just see it as a process of just adding complexity. And I'm more pragmatic versus logical. So if I look at an issue, I will go, if this is where we want to end up, the way that we're doing it is going to make it painful to get there. Maybe one should swallow their ego and just get there. So to me, intuition, it's kind of where your imagination is. It's where your moral compass is. If I look at the character of like Nettwerk, it's the culture of Nettwerk. It's the ability of, people to throw out logic, and, data without biases is what it is. People add a lot of bias to data to fit what they want it to fit. I'm always looking for what doesn't fit. And that's where the opportunity is. So that's why I don't change that point of that advice because it's not how I work. Yes.
It's really interesting what you said there, especially on the data, which is, I used to be, lawyer working with a lot of technology companies. And one of the biggest realizations I learned when I was doing contracts was not what's in the contract, what's missing. Because it's easy to respond to what's there, but it's much more challenging to respond to what's not there. You have to think your way through it. You have to figure out what's not there. And when you start that direction, you're suddenly looking at things in a partnership in a much different way. And that's been really helpful for me for my entire career of what's missing here. Like, great, you've given me this data, but what am I not getting? And even just simple questions that we were doing a recent deal. And I said, what did we not get that we wanted in the deal? And how do we feel about that? And it opened a much more interesting conversation.
I always approach contracts from the point of view of the best contracts are ones that you never look at afterwards. Contracts are all about if something goes wrong. It has nothing to do with if it goes right.
If you get the partnership right, the contract is just a reflection of what you already know. But let's pivot again, because I had another question that I really wanted to get to with you, which is around, and you sort of touched on this a little bit, is this word creativity. I'm sure if you looked at a Google search, you'll see it's skyrocketing how much people use the word creativity now. This is called creative leadership. I have my own view about it. And I actually believe anyone, in the same way you said that, positivity can be learned, I think creativity can be learned, that there are rational steps you can get there. But I'm curious, how do you define creativity in business, not in art? We all know what that looks like, but creativity in leadership and business, because I think it is foundational as this world is shifting again, that people need that skill set.
I see the creativity in business. The root of it is just listen. And you can apply that in every part of your life, not just business. And for a lot of people, it's the hardest thing to do, including me. Sometimes joining the conversation versus listening to the conversation turns the conversation and you don't learn anything. So I think listening is the hardest thing to do, but it's the most powerful, especially in business. Listen to what your team is telling you. Even if you disagree, listen. You can then debate with them after, but don't cut them off. Listen. You will find in almost every case, people just want to be heard. And if you've already got your point of view figured out, you've already got the thing that you're going to say as a counterpoint figured out, and you're focused on that, then you're not hearing. And you're not getting the value of having that relationship. Mark and I have been in this business together for 41 years. Rick joined 38 years ago. How many businesses with founding partners last that long? It's because we've all developed a habit of listening to each other, not discounting what the other has to say, having lively debates, absolutely, but never allowing it to affect our love for each other and our respect for each other. And that's because we learn to listen to each other.
For someone who's starting off a new business where the speed and velocity of what's happening is so much greater, how would you recommend that they implement that from the get-go? Because I absolutely agree with you. And then I would also say it is one of the most challenging elements to make space for, because we're just trying to make decisions and we're trying to, there's so much pressure to perform. So how would you say, because you've had 40 years to do this, how do you tell it to the person in year one?
Pressure it's self-imposed. There is no drama. It's self-imposed. It's all created within inside your own mind. Mark is a musical genius. He's a musician. He looks at music and emotions differently than I do. But we've listened to each other. Any pressure, it's just self-imposed. It's made up. It doesn't exist. If nothing happened that day, would anything be different the day afterwards? Chances are no.
My mom always told me, she said, how are you going to feel 24 hours from now about this? And how are you going to feel 6 months from now about how you responded to it?
Yeah.
And it was a really good phrase. Hard to do in practice, but a very good framing.
Really hard to do in practice. Because we're passionate, emotional beings, right? I mean, business people are creative. They're just created different.
100%. This has been amazing. As you know, I like to end my interviews with one final question. It's a challenging one, and I love the direction everyone takes it, which is, how would you describe yourself in 6 words?
Walking backwards on a winding road.
Makes total sense. Yeah, I love it. I love that. Terry, thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate you coming on.
You're more than welcome.
See everyone next time on Creative Leadership. Thanks again, Terry.